Hello everyone. We will start chapter 4 and following our understanding of cells and organelles, we are going to see now the tissues, and the end of this chapter we will see the integumentary system or the skin. So let's start. Now, if you recall, tissue is a group of similar cells performing the same function. We covered this in chapter 1 at the levels of organization. So tissues are similar cells perform same functions or function. Okay, in our body we have 4 different types of tissues: epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscular tissues or muscle tissues, and nervous tissues. We would start with the epithelial tissue. Now, epithelial tissue serves 2 basic functions. They line the body cavities and cover surfaces. For example, the inner of our mouth is lined with epithelial cells. The stomach, the intestine, and lung cavities all are lined with an epithelial cell or epithelial cells. Our skin is made out of epithelial cells. The second major function of epithelial tissue is glandular tissue. All glands in our body are made out of epithelial cells. And here we have 2 different types of glands. We have exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Exocrine glands, they have a duct. They release their secretion into a duct. So for the exocrine gland, usually they have like an exit for their secretion. This is an exocrine gland, and this is the exit for their secretion. So their secretions would leave these clusters of cells through this exit or through this duct. Whereas the endocrine glands, they secrete their products, usually their products are hormones, into the blood without the presence of this exit. So what happens is that these cells will sit beside each other. There is no exit or duct, and they release their secretions into the surrounding area. And around the surrounding area there are blood vessels. So these secretions eventually will go to the blood. But basically they don't have this duct that can take the secretions. So these are the 2 basic types of glands in our body. Let's move on to see the different types of epithelial tissue. Now we are talking about their classification. Now, we classify them based on their shape. We have squamous cells. These are flat cells. Lined vessels, part of the lung, and they cover the body surface, like we said, like skin. Skin is made out of squamous cells. Then the second type, cuboidal cells. These are like a cube cells. These are lining tubules and gland cells or glands in our body. These are usually cuboidal cells. And the third type is columnar cells because of their shape. Their shape is like column. And those cells will line respiratory, digestive, and reproductive tract. So this is the first way of their classification based on shape. Then the number of layers. If it was just one layer of cells, then we will call it simple layer. But if it was more than one layer of cells, all of them, remember, all of these are epithelial cells. these are also epithelial cells. But if they are one layer of epithelial cells, we will call them simple. And if they are more than one layer of epithelial cells, we will call them stratified cells. Usually, the single layer or simple layer of epithelial cells, usually they will help for diffusion across cell barriers. So they would help, for example, in our lungs, oxygen and CO2 need to diffuse in and out. So if these were like several layers of cells, then oxygen cannot diffuse. Okay? Whereas with the stratified, we need them for production, for protection, sorry, for protection. That is in our skin, for example. In our skin, we will see it later, that our skin is made out of stratified epithelial cells. So this is how they will look like. We have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar. Okay, we have stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar, and of course we have the exocrine glands. As you can see, they have these ducts. Okay, and we have the endocrine glands. The endocrine glands are these cells in pink, and they are filtrated by the blood. So they are secreting directly into the environment, and their secretions will be picked up by the blood. So there is no exit for them, for their secretions. So this is the overall classification of epithelial cells. And here, for example, they have they listed examples where you will find them. So you need to know these examples. I'm not going to read them word by word. We might talk about them. If you have any question about them, post it in the forum, and we can go over them when we meet. The second type of tissue in our body is the connective tissues. And these tissues support soft organs of the body. Also, they would connect parts of the body, like muscles and bones, for example. They are connected through connective tissue. They also store fat and to produce blood cells. Now, a general feature of these connective tissues, that their cells are embedded in non-living extracellular matrix. What does it mean? It means that these cells are somehow bounded to a matrix, to the medium they are living within. It doesn't mean that they are not moving. No, it means that these cells, in many cases, they are not attached to each other. They are kind of like separated. And they are separated with this matrix. Now, with the epithelial cells, all of these epithelial cells are usually packed with each other. Now, here, with the connective tissue cells, there are some spaces between them, and that space is the matrix. So the matrix would provide some strength, and based on their components, structures, and functions, we can classify them as fibrous or specialized connective tissue. For the fibrous connective tissue, they are usually for support. Think of them, they are for support. They provide strength and elasticity that will allow organs to maintain their shape and recoil if that shape was changed. What does this mean? For example, think of the lungs. The lungs, for example, they can expand when we are taking deep breath. But after that expansion, they have to recoil. They have to return to their original size. Similarly, the urinary bladder. Urinary bladder, we are using it to temporarily store the urine, and it will get enlarged. Okay, one of its ability to maintain or to To adapt to that change, because it has some of these connective tissue, but also at the same time it has epithelial tissue as well. Maybe the urinary bladder is not a good example, but lungs, for example, is a good example. Also, ligaments and tendons. These are good examples of their ability to recoil, to stretch and recoil. Okay, so we'll say lungs and ligaments. Now, these connective tissues, they contain fibers and cells, and again, these cells are embedded within a matrix. And the matrix is gel-like, so it's a little bit viscous. It's not like water, they are swimming within it. No, it's more like a thick, medium, a thick substance that these cells are sitting there and kind of they are not moving. And the matrix in reality is the matrix what gives this connective tissue its characteristics, its ability to support or to expand and change its shape and so on. And for the cells of these fibrous connective tissues, we have different types of cells. We have things called fibroblasts, macrophages, lymphocytes, and neutrophils. Each one of these cells is performing different function. We're not going to cover them in details, but just understand that these are different types of cells performing different functions. And also we have different types of fibers, collagen, elastic, and reticular. And again, each one of these fibers is different in its width, for example, in its function, and its elasticity, its ability to stretch and recoil, and so on. So we will have different types of fibers within the connective tissue. Not necessarily all of these fibers and all of these cells will be presented in every connective tissue, but these are, the most general types of cells and fibers that we frequently will find them in connective tissue. The other type of now for no before moving to the other type, for these fibrous connective tissue we have four general types. We have loose connective tissue, and these usually would surround internal organs, surround muscles and the blood vessels. And then we have dense connective tissues. These usually will form tendons, ligaments, deeper layers of skin. Now the difference between loose and dense, and we will see it in an image, that loose, there are some spaces between the component of connective tissue. There are some spaces within the loose, but with the dense there is no space. They are packed to each other, and we will see some images. So these are the two types. Then also we have elastic connective tissue. This would surround hollow organs. Hollow organs are the organs that they have like a space within them, like the stomach and the bladder, and they will change the shape or size regularly. Like for example, the stomach and, as we said, the urinary bladder, they are constantly changing their shape or size. So these elastic fibers would help in adapting that change in shape. Aorta, for example, the major blood vessel coming out of the heart, is made out of a lot of elastic fibers to adapt these changes of shape when the heart is contracting. And the last type is something called reticular connective tissue. This would make the internal framework of soft organs like the liver and the lymphatic system. Reticular, it's made out of very thin connective tissues or fibers, sorry, and they will form something like a network, like a screen, like a filter, something like this. And the fluid usually would pass between them. Okay, so these are the reticular connective tissue. This is an image that shows the different component of a typical connective tissue. We will have, for example, the fibroblast. These are the cells. We will have the different types of fibers. Like this is the collagen fiber. For example, these are the reticular fibers. Okay, these are the elastic fibers. These are the macrophages. These are nerve fibers, blood capillaries, and so on. So different types of cells and different types of fibers within these connective tissues. And here is the ground substance that will form the matrix. And as you can see, there are a lot of spaces between these cells. All of these spaces, it's not just an air, it's that matrix, that ground substance that forms the matrix. And technically, the ground substance plus the fibers, these are the matrix. Here, a view to see the difference between the loose and the dense connective tissue. As you can see, the dense is very packed fibers, collagen fibers. Whereas the loose, as you can see, there are a lot of spaces between the different fibers. These are still the thick pink fibers are collagen fibers. And the thin ones are elastic fibers. So there are a lot of spaces between them. So these are loose and they are sitting in a random pattern, whereas with the dense, as you can see, there is no space between them and they are sitting with a pattern that all of them are running in the same direction. We can find these in ligaments and tendons, whereas we can find these in internal structures, as we said, in the liver or in the spleen. The other type of connective tissue, which is the specialized connective tissue, include the cartilage, bones, blood, and adipose tissue. And for the cartilage, now cartilage is somehow a transitional tissue, like a midway tissue, from which the bones develop. So they are not as hard, let me write it, not as hard as bone, but also not as soft as other connective tissue. So somehow it's in between them. Now cartilages are important because they maintain the shape of certain body parts like the nose and ears. They cushions vertebra, like in the vertebral disc, and they lines the joint cavities. Cartilage are tough materials, and they are exist in areas where we need toughness, but also we need some flexibility. And that is the beauty of the cartilage. So they are strong, of course not as strong as bones, but yet they are extremely strong, yet they are flexible. And that's how we are able to move, for example, through our vertebral disc. Bones, they are forming the skeleton, and we are going to study them in a separate chapter. Blood, this is the fluid tissue. So blood by itself is a connective tissue, and it's a fluid matrix is the plasma. We have there the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets. All of these are contributing to different functions, and in general, blood is responsible for transporting materials and also redistributing heat. And lastly, the adipose tissue, which is made out of fat cells, and they will function in insulation, protection, and energy storage. Sorry. Here are images of two different types two different types of connective tissues, of specialized connective tissue. This is the cartilage and this is the fat. I believe you are going to see them under microscope when we meet in the lab. Okay, I will stop here. I will stop here, and I will continue in a second part of these videos.